My name is Ashley, and I never thought my life would change so dramatically in just 1 year. Looking back now, I can't help but laugh at how naive I was about what I thought was my perfect marriage. 4 years ago, at age 30, I married Robert. We seemed like the perfect match. I was climbing the corporate ladder as a project manager at Richardson Financial, while he was content with his position as a manager at TradeWorks. Unlike many of my colleagues' husbands who were constantly chasing promotions, Robert preferred a simpler life. He'd come home early, cook dinner, and we'd spend quiet evenings together. I earned more than him, but it never seemed to bother him. In fact, he seemed to enjoy having a successful wife. "Honey, I made your favorite pasta tonight," he'd say almost every Friday, greeting me with a kiss as I walked through the door, exhausted from another long week of meetings and deadlines. "You spoil me too much," I'd reply, breathing in the familiar scent of garlic and herbs that filled our rented house. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dreams. We were saving for our own place, and the joint account kept growing steadily. We had already saved $200,000, not enough for our dream home yet, but we were getting there. "We'll have our own place soon," Robert would say, scrolling through real estate listings on his phone while we cuddled on the couch. "Just another year or two of saving." I'd nod, imagining our future together. We talked about having kids someday, but we both agreed to wait until we had our own place. Everything seemed so clear, so certain. Then came that Tuesday in March. I remember it perfectly because it was the day everything started to unravel, though I didn't know it yet. I was in the middle of presenting quarterly projections to the board when the room started spinning. The faces around the conference table blurred, and the last thing I heard was someone shouting my name before everything went black. I woke up in the emergency room, surrounded by concerned faces and the steady beep of monitors. A doctor with kind eyes and graying hair was standing by my bed, holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Parker," he said gently, "we need to run some additional tests, but the preliminary scan shows something concerning. There appears to be a mass in your brain." The word mass echoed in my head like a death sentence. I felt my world tilting again, but this time I remained conscious, painfully aware of every word that followed. "We'll need to do more extensive testing to determine if it's benign and if surgery is possible," the doctor continued. "I need to be honest with you, even if surgery is an option, there's a significant risk of long-term disability." I nodded mechanically, my mind already racing to Robert. How would he take this news? Would he stay by my side if I became disabled? We had promised in sickness and in health, but this was different. This was real. I took a cab home from the hospital that evening, my mind racing with how to break the news to Robert. When I opened our front door, I found him in the kitchen, humming while stirring something that smelled like beef stew. The normalcy of it all made my heart ache. "Robert," I called out softly, still standing in the doorway. "I need to tell you something." He turned around, wooden spoon in hand, and must have seen something in my face, because the smile immediately dropped from his. "What's wrong, Ash?" I told him everything, the fainting spell, the hospital, the tumor. His face grew increasingly pale as I spoke, but what happened next caught me completely off guard. "Will you be able to keep working?" he asked, setting down the spoon. "What happens if you have to quit? Do we have enough money?" I stood there, stunned. My husband had just learned I might be dying or face permanent disability, and his first concern was about money? About my ability to work? "We have our savings," I managed to reply, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "It should be enough to get us through the initial period. We can figure out the rest later." Right, he nodded, running his hands through his hair. "The savings. Okay." The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments and tests. I tried to maintain my normal work schedule, but it became increasingly difficult. The headaches were getting worse, and some days I could barely focus on my computer screen. "Ashley, you need to take some time off," my boss, Sarah Mitchell, finally said after finding me with my head in my hands one afternoon. "We can arrange for 6 months of medical leave. Your health has to come first." I knew she was right, but being at home all day was harder than I expected. The walls seemed to close in on me as I lay on the couch, wondering if each day might be one of my last. Would I die? Would I survive but never be the same? The questions tormented me endlessly. And then there was Robert's changing behavior. He started coming home later and later, sometimes well past midnight. When I asked him about it, he'd always have the same response. I'm picking up extra shifts, Ash. We need the money for your treatment. You understand, right? I'd nod, too exhausted from my own fears to probe further. Sometimes I'd hear him on the phone in another room, speaking in hushed tones, but I told myself he was probably just dealing with work stuff. My mind was occupied with darker thoughts. What would happen if the tumor was malignant? If I survived but ended up paralyzed? Would Robert stick around to take care of a disabled wife? After weeks of trying to handle everything on my own, I finally broke down and called my mother. I'd been avoiding it, not wanting to worry her at her age. She'd had me late in life and was now in her 70s. But I needed her, more than I'd ever needed her before. Mom, I said when she answered the phone, my voice cracking. I'm sick. As soon as I explained everything, she didn't hesitate. I'm coming over right now, sweetheart. Pack my bag this minute. She arrived the next day. I was having one of my bad days, barely able to make it from the bedroom to the bathroom without getting dizzy. She took one look at me and switched into full mother mode, just like when I was a little girl with the flu. Having Mom there was like being wrapped in a warm blanket. She cooked, cleaned, made sure I took my medications on time, and most importantly, held my hand during the worst moments when the fear became overwhelming. But not everyone was happy about her presence. Robert's face would tighten every time he came home and found her there. He'd force a smile and retreat to the bedroom, or suddenly remember work emails he had to send. Your mother doesn't have to stay here all the time, he said one night when we were alone. I can take care of you. But you're hardly ever home anymore, I pointed out. Because I'm working, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. I'm working for us, Ash. Mom noticed the tension too. After 2 weeks, she announced she was heading home. You seem stronger now, sweetheart, she said, though I could tell she was reluctant to leave. But I'm just a phone call away if you need me. The next few weeks were a blur of medical tests and clinic visits. The house felt empty without Mom, and Robert was spending even more time away. But I forced myself to focus on my health, on getting through each day, on hoping for good news. Then finally, after what felt like an eternity, I got it. At my latest appointment, my doctor was actually smiling as he looked at my test results. Mrs. Parker, I have good news, he said, and I felt my heart skip a beat. The tumor is benign, and it's in a location where we can safely operate. The risk of complications is minimal. I burst into tears of relief. After all these weeks of uncertainty and fear, there was hope. Real hope. I couldn't wait to tell Robert. Maybe now things could go back to normal. Maybe all his strange behavior had just been stress about my condition. I practically floated out of the hospital, already planning how I would tell him the good news. I decided to head straight home, hoping to catch him before he left for work. I quietly inserted my key into the lock, but before I could open the door fully, I heard his voice from inside. He was talking loudly on the phone, apparently not expecting anyone home at this hour. I can't take it anymore, Sarah. You don't know what it's like living with her, he was saying, his voice filled with disgust. The constant smell of medicines in the house, her sickly appearance, it's just unbearable. My hand froze on the doorknob as he continued. I know. But you should see her now, she's nothing like the woman I married. Always weak, always complaining about headaches. I'm too young to be playing nurse to an invalid. Each word felt like a physical blow. I stood there, listening to my husband disparage me to another woman, my legs trembling beneath me. Yeah, the money situation is being handled. We've got quite a bit in savings. Look, I'll figure something out. I just need to get out of this situation before she gets worse. I pushed the door open fully and stepped into the room. Robert spun around, the phone still pressed to his ear, his face draining of color when he saw me. "I'll call you back," he mumbled into the phone, ending the call. What was that all about? My voice came out steadier than I expected. For a moment, Robert just stared at me, caught off guard. Then his expression shifted, hardened. "Well, I guess you heard everything," he said, straightening his shoulders. "Maybe it's better this way. We need to talk." "Talk about what?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming. "I want a divorce, Ashley. And I want half of our savings." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "Let's be realistic, you're sick, and I'm not going to spend the best years of my life taking care of an invalid. I need someone young, healthy. I deserve that." I stood there, absorbing his words, thinking about the good news I'd just received from the doctor. But looking at Robert now, I realized it wouldn't make any difference. This wasn't about my illness, it was about who he really was. "We need to do this quickly," he continued, gaining confidence from my silence. "Before your surgery. I'm not risking being legally tied to a disabled person if something goes wrong." "Fine," I said quietly. "I agree to the divorce." He seemed surprised by my quick agreement, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. "Good," he said, recovering quickly. "I'll go to a hotel tonight. I don't want to stay here anymore. I'll come back tomorrow to pack my things." "That's probably best," I replied, my voice hollow. Robert grabbed his jacket and wallet, not even bothering to pack an overnight bag. At the door, he paused for a moment, like he might say something else, then shook his head and left. After Robert left, I stood in our living room for what felt like hours, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. Finally, I decided to start packing his things. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him again tomorrow. As I moved around the house gathering his belongings, my eyes fell on his laptop, still open on the dining room table. I'd never been the type to snoop through my husband's things, but something compelled me to look at the screen. What I found made my knees buckle, and I had to grab the back of a chair for support. There, in full view, was a series of intimate messages between Robert and Sarah. As I scrolled through their conversation history, my stomach turned. There were explicit photos, intimate details of their encounters, and worst of all, cruel jokes about me. "Poor sick Ashley," Sarah had written. "At least her condition gives us more time together." "God, you should see her now," Robert had replied. "She looks like death warmed over. I can barely stand to look at her anymore." My hands were shaking as I continued scrolling, but what I found next made me gasp out loud. There was another conversation thread, this one with Amanda Wilson, my husband's boss's wife. The messages between them were equally intimate, filled with declarations of love and plans for secret meetings. "Does your husband suspect anything?" Robert had asked her. "John's clueless as always," she'd replied. "Too busy with work to notice what's happening under his nose." I felt sick, but I forced myself to keep reading. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of everything, the messages, the photos, the timestamps. Something in me knew this might be important later. The divorce proceedings moved quickly after that. We didn't have much to untangle, no children, no property of our own. The house was rented, and our only joint asset was our savings account with the $200,000 we'd been saving for a down payment on a house. Money that had come primarily from my higher salary, though I'd never minded that imbalance before. Robert's lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit, had other ideas. "Your Honor," he argued during the proceedings, "while Mrs. Parker may have contributed more directly to the savings account, my client's contributions to the household were equally valuable. He managed all domestic duties, allowing Mrs. Parker to focus on her career. The money he earned went directly to household expenses, groceries, utilities, daily necessities." I watched as Robert nodded solemnly beside his lawyer, playing the role of the devoted house husband who'd sacrificed his own career advancement for our home. The same man who'd called me a burden just weeks before. The judge agreed with their argument. The court finds that both parties contributed equally to the marriage, albeit in different ways. The savings will be divided equally between Mr. and Mrs. Parker. Just like that, half of our savings, $100,000, went to Robert. The money I'd worked so hard to save, stayed late at the office for, taken on extra projects for, was now being split with the man who'd betrayed me in every possible way. After the divorce was finalized, Robert moved out immediately. I couldn't stay in that apartment either, too many memories, too much pain. My mother welcomed me home with open arms, just as she had when I was a scared teenager after my first breakup. 2 months after the divorce, I finally had my surgery. The procedure went exactly as the doctors had hoped. They successfully removed the tumor, and my recovery began immediately. Each day, I felt a little stronger, a little more like my old self. During my recovery, I stayed with my mother. She was my rock, just as she'd always been, but I started noticing she seemed more tired than usual. One evening, as we sat in her cozy living room drinking tea, she took my hand. "Ashley, sweetheart, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I've made a decision about my future. I found a wonderful nursing home, Sunset Gardens. It's peaceful, has excellent care, and I've already paid for my stay there." She squeezed my hand. "I want to spend my remaining years somewhere I won't be a burden." "Mom, you're not a burden." "Let me finish," she interrupted with a smile. "I've thought this through. The house will be yours, along with my savings, about $300,000. You deserve a fresh start after everything you've been through." I tried to argue, but Mom had that determined look I knew so well. A week later, I helped her move into Sunset Gardens. The place was beautiful, with gardens and activities, and Mom seemed genuinely excited about this new chapter in her life. After getting her settled, I returned to what was now my house. It felt strange being there alone, but also peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. Life has a funny way of serving up moments of perfect timing. About a month after Mom's move, I was sitting in my favorite cafe, enjoying a quiet lunch break, when I heard a familiar voice. "Ashley, is that really you?" I looked up to see Robert's mother, Margaret, standing by my table, her face pale as if she'd seen a ghost. "Hello, Margaret," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "I can't believe it," she stammered. "Robert told us you were terminally ill," he said. She trailed off, looking embarrassed. I couldn't help but laugh. "He told you I was dying?" "Well, as you can see, I'm very much alive. Still working at Richardson Financial, actually. And Mom just left me her house. I'm planning to sell it and buy an apartment closer to work." Margaret's face went through a series of emotions before settling on something between shame and satisfaction. "You know," she said, leaning forward, "Robert's living with me now. That woman he left you for, Sarah, she took every penny he got from the divorce and then left him. He's got nothing now." I took a slow sip of my coffee, hiding my smile behind the cup. I didn't need to say anything. Margaret's tone told me she was as disgusted with her son's behavior as I was. "He made his bed," she added, shaking her head. "Now he has to lie in it." As I watched Margaret leave the cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I hadn't wished ill on Robert. I'd been too busy focusing on my own recovery to think much about him at all. But knowing that karma had dealt him such a perfect hand of justice? Well, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. I was sorting through some old photos in my mother's living room when I heard aggressive pounding on the front door. Before I could even get up, the door burst open, and there stood Robert, his face red with anger and something else, desperation. "You lied to me," he shouted, storming into the house like he still had a right to be there. "My mother told me everything. You're completely fine." I stood up slowly, keeping the coffee table between us. "Get out of my house, Robert." "Your house?" He laughed bitterly. "The house your mother conveniently left you after our divorce? Along with all that money?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now saw as theatrical. "Ashley, baby, I made a mistake. I was scared and stupid. I still love you. We can start over. Love me? I felt a cold anger rising in my chest. You're a traitor, Robert. You abandoned me when I was sick. You cheated on me. I want nothing to do with you. Why didn't you tell me you were getting better? He demanded. Why didn't you tell me about your mother's plans to leave you all this? His voice cracked with what he probably thought was emotion, but I recognized as greed. You want to know why? I stepped closer to him. The day I found out my tumor was benign, the day I rushed home to tell you the good news, was the same day I heard you on the phone with your mistress, talking about what a burden I was. He had the decency to flinch at that, but recovered quickly. That's not fair, Ashley. You deliberately hid your mother's inheritance from me during the divorce. Half of all this belongs to me by law. No, it doesn't, I said firmly. Mom left me this inheritance after our divorce was final. You have no claim to it. Bullshit. He was shouting now, his face getting redder. You knew this was coming. You and your mother planned this. You hid assets during our divorce proceedings. That's illegal. I'll sue you, Ashley. I'll take you to court and prove that you deliberately concealed future assets during our divorce. You'll have to give me half of everything. I stood in my mother's living room, watching Robert's tirade with a calmness that seemed to infuriate him even more. When he finally paused for breath, I walked to my desk, pulled out my phone, and pulled up the photos I'd saved months ago. Before you continue threatening me, I said quietly, I think you should see something. I held up my phone, showing him the screenshots of his conversations with Amanda Wilson, his boss's wife. The color drained from his face. You remember Amanda, don't you? Your boss John's wife? I scrolled through the messages slowly, letting him see every damning detail. I wonder what John would think about these messages. About the photos. About all those lunch breaks you spent with his wife while claiming to work overtime. You wouldn't, he whispered, but his voice had lost all its previous bravado. I'm trying to recover from a serious illness, Robert. I don't need this stress. I don't need your threats. I don't need you bursting into my house making demands. I locked my phone and set it down. Leave me alone, or John gets copies of everything. Your choice. He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he backed toward the door. You've changed, he said accusingly. No, Robert. I just stopped being afraid. After he left, I sat down and cried, not from sadness or fear, but from relief. It was truly over. The next few months were transformative. I sold my mother's house for an excellent price, thanks to the hot real estate market. With that money and the inheritance, I bought a beautiful apartment in a luxury building just 3 blocks from my office. The walk to work became my daily therapy, helping me rebuild my strength step by step. The illness had taken its toll on my body. I'd lost nearly 20 pounds during the worst of it. But slowly, I began to recover. I started taking yoga classes in my building's fitness center, gradually rebuilding my strength and flexibility. My appetite returned, and with it, my energy. My boss proved to be more understanding than I could have hoped for. Take all the time you need, she told me during my first week back. We're just glad to have you back with us. She arranged for me to work flexible hours, allowing me to attend my follow-up appointments and therapy sessions without stress. Sometimes, on my morning walks to work, I'd catch my reflection in the sleek glass buildings and barely recognize myself. Not because of the weight loss or the small scar hidden beneath my hair, but because of the confidence in my stride, the straightness of my spine, the lift of my chin. I was no longer the woman who had been afraid of being alone, of being sick, of being unloved. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally heard bits of news about Robert. He was still living with his mother, having blown through his divorce settlement with Sarah. Apparently, he'd had to leave his job at TradeWorks, though whether he quit or was fired, I never asked. It didn't matter anymore. My mother thrived at Sunset Gardens, making new friends and taking up watercolor painting. I visited her every Sunday, and we'd sit in the garden, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing. She never said "I told you so" about Robert, never reminded me that she'd had doubts about him from the start. Instead, she would smile at me with pride and say, "You're blooming, sweetheart." She was right. Like the potted orchid on my new apartment's windowsill, a housewarming gift from my team at work, I was blooming. The tumor, the betrayal, the divorce, they hadn't destroyed me. They had forced me to grow stronger roots.
"More champagne, Mom?" Julian asked, refilling my glass before I could respond. I smiled hesitantly, nervously glancing at my son and his fiancée. We were celebrating their recent engagement with an intimate family dinner, though an unsettled feeling stirred in my gut. "To your happiness," Sienna purred, clinking her glass against mine. I nodded and took a generous sip. "There's something we wanted to discuss with you tonight," Julian said, exchanging a sly glance with Sienna. "We're planning a huge engagement party next month. Only the best for our perfect union." I chuckled anxiously. "How wonderful for you both, but those parties can get quite pricey, can't they?" "Oh, we're not paying a thing," Sienna said with a wave of her hand. "That's going to be your gift to us." I nearly choked on my champagne. "I'm sorry." "As Julian's mother, it's your duty to pay," Sienna continued. "We expect you to contribute at least $25,000. Consider it an investment in your son's future." They couldn't be serious. $25,000 for a party, I said incredulously. "Do you have any idea how unreasonable?" "Don't be ridiculous, Mom," Julian interrupted. "You make good money, and you have all the inheritance money from Dad you've been hoarding. My husband's recent death after battling cancer was still an open wound." I recoiled at their callous remarks. "That money is my nest egg for retirement, and to pay these expenses without even consulting me first." Sienna rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, still harping on about being consulted. Get over yourself already. You're the mother of the groom. This is what's expected. Shell out the cash and be grateful we're letting you contribute at all. You should feel honored we're even inviting you." Julian sneered. "So write the damn check so we can start planning." I sat stunned, unable to comprehend their arrogance and disregard. I appealed once more to my son. "Honey, be reasonable. You can have a lovely party without extravagant costs. Let's scale things back a bit." Julian slammed his fist on the table, rattling the glasses. "I knew you would pull this cheapskate crap," he shouted. "Some mother you are can't even support your only son." Hot tears sprang to my eyes as I took in their contemptuous glares. Perhaps I had spoiled my son rotten over the years, but I never imagined he could treat me with such cruelty and disrespect. I stood abruptly, disgusted by the two vipers lounging in my home. "I think you should leave now," I said quietly. Sienna leaped up and gripped my shoulders with sharp red nails. "Don't even try rejecting your duty," she growled, her perfumed breath assaulting my nostrils. "You either pay up, or you can kiss your relationship with Julian and any future grandchildren goodbye." I shook her off violently. "Get out," I bellowed. "Out of my house this instant." They stalked out without another word, but I saw them exchange a triumphant smirk. My heart dropped, realizing the engagement celebration I had hoped for would instead deliver nothing but greed, manipulation, and pain. The next evening, tired from a long day at work, but determined to settle the conflict, I prepared a simple pasta dinner, hoping to have an open discussion with Julian. I heard the front door slam and braced myself as loud footsteps echoed down the hall. "Something smells good." Julian breezed into the kitchen and headed straight for the wine cabinet. My hopes lifted for a moment, then quickly faded as Sienna clip-clopped in behind him, reeking of heavy perfume. So much for a private chat with my son. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I asked dryly, draining the pasta. "You're going to love what we have planned," Sienna gushed, ignoring my tone as she rifled through her tacky designer handbag. "We met with the wedding coordinator today, and everything is set. All we need is one little thing from you." She flourished a folder stuffed with brochures and invoices. "Just sign on the dotted line for the $50,000 wedding package." I froze, a chill running down my spine. $50,000? I gasped. "For a single-day celebration? That's outrageous." "It's our special day," Julian whined. "Don't I deserve the very best?" I appealed to his conscience. Son, be reasonable. Let's scale back and have an intimate, meaningful ceremony instead of this circus. Sienna slammed the folder down. You incompetent hag. Who said this was open for discussion? She screeched. You will pay every penny to give your only son his dream wedding. Rage boiled up inside of me. Through gritted teeth, I replied, you entitled, nasty piece off. Mom, stop. We all turned in surprise to see my daughter, Harper, standing firmly in the archway. I had been so focused on the confrontation I hadn't even heard her come in. Stay out of this, dyke, Sienna snarled at my heavily tattooed, alternative graphic novelist daughter. It doesn't concern you. The hell it doesn't, Harper retorted. You don't talk that way to my mother. She crossed the room to stand protectively beside me. Under normal circumstances, I might have bristled at her interference, always trying to be the strong, independent matriarch. But at that moment, her solidarity was a lifeline, and I welcomed it. Julian threw his hands up melodramatically. I asked for one little wedding, and my entire family turns against me. He pointed an accusing finger at his sister. This is all your influence, filling Mom's head with delusions. She owes me this money and her loyalty. Harper folded her arms. Mom owes you nothing but basic respect, which clearly isn't reciprocated. She raised you single-handedly after Dad died, working tirelessly to give you every advantage. And this is how you repay decades of love and generosity with shameless exploitation. My ingrained son had no response other than childish whimpers. Harper turned to me, her tattooed hand gripping mine firmly. You stand strong, Mom. Set boundaries and demand the respect you deserve. I've got your back. The knot in my chest loosened with immense relief. My daughter's stalwart support washed away my self-doubts. I would not bow down to these greedy, manipulative vultures for another minute. I drew myself up to full height, emboldened. You both have two choices, I addressed Julian and Sienna in a loud, clear voice. Treat me and my daughter with basic decency or get the hell out of our lives. Sienna opened her mouth, no doubt to spew more bile. But she caught Harper's murderous glare, thought better of it, and dragged a whimpering Julian out by his ear instead. I squeezed Harper's hand, my eyes brimming with grateful tears. However did I get so lucky to have a daughter like you? She smiled crookedly, just being a chip off the old block. Now let's dish up that pasta and plot our next move. These asshats don't know who they're messing with. The next week crawled by in intense uncertainty. My phone buzzed incessantly with demanding texts and voicemails from Julian, raging when I didn't immediately call him back. I started screening my calls, not having the energy to deal with his abusive diatribes. When Saturday afternoon came, I decided to treat myself to a manicure to lift my spirits. As I sat relaxing while the technician groomed my nails, my phone buzzed yet again. Normally, I would ignore it, but glancing down, I saw it was a call from Julian's number. Curiosity got the best of me. Hi, honey, I answered cautiously. It's your witch of a mother, came Sienna's grating voice instead. My blood instantly started boiling. I was just about to hang up when I heard Julian's sneering tones in the background. Is the old bag actually taking your call? She's been dodging mine all week. There was a rustling sound, followed by his voice coming clearly through the phone speaker. Mom, what the hell? I've been calling nonstop. Have you given any more thought to funding the wedding? The coordinator is breathing down my neck. I opened my mouth to deliver a stern refusal, but Sienna's shrill voice cut me off. Oh, let it go already. She's clearly a lost cause. There was a slap, as if she swatted his arm. Your mother is a dried-up, selfish prune. Once we're married, we'll change all the account passwords so she can never access our money. My eyes nearly popped out of my skull. Our money. There was more rustling. Then Sienna's grating voice continued. Why are we even still inviting her to the wedding? She'll just show up wearing some raggedy outfit from the clearance rack at TJ Maxx. Their raucous laughter boiled my blood, but worse was Julian's reply. Right? God, and you know she's going to be all whiny about contributing to our future, as if that puny life insurance payout could compare to what I make in a month. The hair on my neck bristled with outrage. The puny payout was nearly $500,000 that I had invested for retirement, not blown on sports cars and designer clothes like my prodigal son. Sienna scoffed loudly. Oh please, we both know it was your daddy's money that set you up nicely at that firm. Your mother couldn't manage an allowance without a man's help. Hell yes to that, Julian cackled. And we put that inheritance money to way better use, like annual trips to Dubai. First class all the way. Their uproarious laughter made my blood boil. I stabbed the red phone icon with so much force I nearly cracked the screen. Those money-grubbing snakes. I had suspected their motive all along, but hearing their vile words firsthand rocked me to the core. My hands trembled with rage and indignation. I waved away the technician's concerned glances, threw a wad of cash on the counter, and raced for the door. I drove home in record time, burning up with the need to unload to Harper. Thankfully, she was already there waiting, her motorcycle parked haphazardly on the driveway. I burst through the front door, and she leaped up from the couch, startled by my frazzled state. The story came pouring out in an enraged torrent. Harper's green eyes blazed. "Those conniving ___," she yelled. I knew it all along. It was never about family or celebration. They just see you as a cash dispensary. I feel so betrayed and used, I said bitterly, choking back tears of frustration. My only son. How could he? Harper gripped my shoulders, her piercing gaze meeting mine. Mom, listen to me. We need to gather evidence and expose these cockroaches for who they really are. Her fist hit her palm with a decisive whack. Contact the wedding coordinator. Get documentation of everything they arranged without your consent. I'll dig into Sienna's background too. I guarantee her family is loaded despite those snake oil tears. We're going to shut this whole circus down. Hope and courage surged up in me again. My wonderful daughter was right. The time had come to take control and fight back. I pulled her in for a fierce hug, more grateful than ever for her integrity and strength. Let's go nail their greedy asses to the wall. Over the next 2 weeks, Harper and I gathered reams of evidence exposing Julian and Sienna's deceit. Harper uncovered that Sienna came from an extremely affluent family who were fully capable of funding their daughter's lavish tastes. Get this, Harper had uncovered on LinkedIn. Her father owns a huge real estate investment firm. He could easily foot the bill for this circus wedding. Meanwhile, I obtained financial records from the wedding coordinator showing the exorbitant expenses Julian and Sienna were trying to rack up on my dime. $75,000 and counting. We have everything we need to confront these swindlers, Harper declared, spreading paperwork across the dining table before us. Let's invite them over to review wedding plans and then drop the hammer on them. Her green eyes glinted with determination. So I extended the bait, luring them over under the pretense of financing, reconciliation, and celebration details. The bait was taken instantly. Right on time, the doorbell screeched urgently. Before I could even answer, Julian and Sienna blew in, reeking as usual of arrogance and channel number 5. Where's my check then? Julian demanded right off the bat. Subtlety had never been his strong suit. Sienna elbowed him sharply, then plastered on a syrupy smile. Yes, do tell us the good news, she trilled. We have so many decisions to finalize for our big day. I gestured for them to take a seat. Under the table, Harper silently slid me the thick manila envelope containing the damning evidence. My heart pounded, but resolve hardened my nerves. I folded my hands tightly on the table. Before we discuss any further arrangements, I have a few concerns to address. I removed the paperwork from the envelope and fanned it out in front of me. According to the wedding coordinator, current expenses total $75,000. Care to explain? Sienna scoffed loudly. It's the wedding of the century. What do you expect? I expect honest communication around finances and shared responsibility. I replied evenly. For example, why don't Sienna's clearly wealthy parents contribute their fair share? After all, I pulled out a copy of her dad's business profile with a net worth in the tens of millions. They could easily afford this. Sienna blanched. Julian sputtered angrily. Leave Sienna's family out of this. My wedding, my financial support, he turned to point a finger at me. And you're my mother, so cut the check. Having expected denial, I calmly slid over the pile of invoices and contracts. Actually, these documents prove otherwise. They have my forged signature authorizing non-refundable down payments totaling $155,000 so far. Care to explain that? Sienna gasped dramatically. Are you accusing us of fraud? From beside me, Harper suddenly slammed down an authoritative fist. Damn straight she is. My daughter's unexpected bellows stunned them into momentary silence. Harper seized the opportunity to append the rest of the manila envelope's contents across the table. Bank statements, screenshots, and phone records, irrefutable evidence of their lies and manipulation, scattered dramatically before us. It's all here in black and white, Harper spat with unrestrained disgust. You snakes have been exploiting my mother's love and trust this whole time, never giving a damn about family bonds, just what you can swindle out of her. You, here were spying on us? Julian spluttered in outrage. Gathering evidence against your fraud, I corrected icily. And now that everything is laid bare, you will cancel this sham wedding immediately. Sienna shot up out of her chair, nostrils flaring. How dare you, she shrieked. I will be marrying Julian with or without your money. She turned to my son with a pout. Back me up here. But Julian just sat there, pale and trembling, the magnitude of revelations rocking him into stunned silence for once. The confrontation had rendered him speechless. Sienna rolled her eyes in disgust. You spineless mama's boy. Forget it. She snatched her tacky designer handbag and stormed out, pausing in the doorway to deliver one final venomous glare. You'll regret this, she hissed at me. We won't forget. Then she flounced away in a cloud of Chanel. I stared evenly back at my shaken son. Nor will we, I said quietly. Now leave. He scrambled up hurriedly, but just before exiting, he mumbled a soft but clear threat. I'll make you pay for this. The day I had been dreading arrived. Julian and Sienna's lavish wedding. I had hoped her confrontation would be the end of it, but these stubborn snakes pursued their farce nuptials anyway, blowing through even more of the retirement money I had entrusted to Julian's accounts. So here I sat, an unwilling participant in their twisted matrimonial circus. All around me, intoxicated guests gambled under ostentatious floral arrangements that cost more than my first car. The crowning glory was an 8-tier fondant cake dripping with handcrafted sugar flowers. Julian and Sienna's smug faces towered above it all in a massive golden frame. My daughter Harper slouched next to me, clad in ripped jeans and combat boots, her pixie-cut green hair clashing spectacularly with the pastel bridesmaid dresses. We silently watched the overblown spectacle unfold, barely concealing our disgust. Suddenly, the music transitioned to a bombastic wedding march. The crowd hushed in anticipation as Julian took his place under the altar's garish archway. My heart clenched. He looked so much like his father, tall and dashing in his tuxedo, beaming with charismatic charm. Not a trace remained of the petulant, greedy boy I had confronted just weeks prior. Radiant pride glowed from him as his bride floated down the aisle. Dressed in a frothy designer gown I had no doubt charged to my credit card. Old memories and grief welled up. I had walked that same path over 30 years ago, knave and drunk on dreams of lifelong partnership and family, dreams that soured all too quickly. My faith in love and devotion had died alongside my husband, and now the son we created together slapped me in the face with the same callous disregard. As the ceremony droned on, a righteous rage simmered within me. I could not, bless this loveless union with my presence for another moment. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly across the polished floor. All eyes turned to me. Harper grasped my hand supportively. I cleared my throat, meeting Julian's alarmed gaze. I apologize, but I cannot stay silent about this travesty. My voice rang out loud and clear. Murmurs rippled through the stunned guests. Julian flushed crimson, shrinking under my bold stare. Before he could muster a response, Sienna shoved past him, teeth bared and eyes spitting fury. How dare you interrupt my perfect day? She advanced toward me, manicured claws outstretched menacingly. I stepped back, recoiling from her vicious energy. Harper immediately confronted the deranged bride. Back off, she commanded, her voice like steel. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Harper relied on my sharp business instincts to manage her quickly ballooning finances. At her behest, I leveraged decades of investment experience to establish trademarks, negotiate publishing rights, and maximize profits. I swelled with pride watching my daughter's passions flourish under my careful cultivation. Soon, Harper was regularly turning up in edgy fashion magazines and sought-after graphic anthologies. She purchased a sleek downtown loft as her business base of operations, proudly showcasing the extravagant views she had earned solely through her prodigious talents. To celebrate Harper's rapid rise, I decided to host an intimate gathering of key supporters and collaborators at her swanky new digs. The catered affair would mark her official arrival as an artistic visionary and independent woman of means. Harper greeted guests with an uncharacteristic nervous energy as I directed caterers to artfully arrange free-flowing champagne and delicate canapes. "You have nothing to worry over," I reassured my daughter as I straightened her smart blazer. "Just be your normal captivating self. These people already adore you." Soon the loft overflowed with Harper's avant-garde inner circle. Daring writers, leading publishers, edgy photographers, and even some A-list names from Harper's celebrity clientele. They all made appearances to toast their favorite tattoo visionary. Pride swelled my chest to hear such powerful figures celebrating my exceptionally talented daughter. This was the launch party Julian could only ever fantasize about. 2 short years ago, my family's name was tarnished by greedy failures. Now, through Harper's virtues, respect had not only been restored but elevated to an artistic elite status. Late into the evening, I stepped onto the balcony beside Harper, gazing over vibrant city lights. She squeezed my hand gently. "None of this would be possible without you, Mom. You believed in me when no one else did, invested in me, fought for me. I'll owe you forever." I wrapped one arm around her slim, leather-clad shoulders, champagne flute clutched elegantly in the other hand. "Nonsense, my brave darling. Your soaring success stems solely from your vision and daring talents." I swept one arm across the glimmering skyline before us. "All this you manifested wholly on your own. I merely facilitated the business deals so you could freely create." Harper grinned crookily. "Ah yes, well, I clearly inherited your ruthless business savvy along with Dad's creative spirit." She playfully clanked her glass to mine. "To the dynamic duo, may we always prevail over vipers and thieves." I laughed brightly, heart swelling with maternal joy. My daughter and I had come through the crucible of greed and betrayal to now bask in self-made success. As the lively celebration carried on behind us, I silently offered one final toast upward to her beloved father. We had created a fine legacy after all, one sculpted purely from integrity, courage, and toil instead of entitlement or manipulation. That legacy now towered as a gleaming testament to morality for all the Julians of the world to gaze upon with envy for decades to come. Over the next 2 years, Harper's star continued to ascend in a brilliant, trailblazing trajectory. Meanwhile, I heard through mutual contacts that Julian languished in obscurity and mounting debt. His lavish lifestyle sustained itself for a while on credit before the house of cards inevitably collapsed. The rare times Julian's name surfaced, it was tied to seedy gossip rags and drunken tabloid scandals. From Sienna's very public affair to Julian getting fired from a car dealership for defaulting on payments, karma seemed intent on grinding my prodigal son into the dirt. I ignored the lurid headlines with a quiet sense of satisfaction, confident I would never lay eyes on him again. By now, I had retired from corporate leadership to focus on passion projects, indulging artistic hobbies, volunteering with disadvantaged youth, and planning leisurely global adventures. I decided it was also time to downsize into a lower-maintenance home. After a prolonged search, I found my perfect oasis, a private bungalow in a picturesque coastal senior community. Mature trees and vibrant gardens welcomed me each morning as I embarked on scenic nature walks with dear widowed friends. The idyllic setting and social kinship brought me a sense of peace I hadn't realized was missing. Meanwhile, Harper had also found her soul's counterpart, a brilliant software developer named Riley who adored her vibrant spirit. I instantly detected true partnership potential upon meeting Riley. My instincts proved correct. Just months after moving in together, Harper excitedly presented me with news of their engagement. I whooped joyfully when she flashed the unique geometric ring Riley had custom designed. "My darling girl," I exclaimed through happy tears, "I'm thrilled you found someone deserving of your tremendous heart." The private garden wedding ceremony Harper described echoed my own intimate vision 3 decades prior. No showy fanfare, just profound lifelong commitment celebrated by cherished community. I clasped Harper's hand, overcome with emotion at how perfectly she was manifesting her father's and my unrealized dreams. Later, during wedding planning over tea and biscuits, Harper hesitated before broaching the subject I knew she would. "Mom, about inviting Julian." I waved one hand briskly. "Let's not sully your special day by entertaining that notion." Harper bit her lip. "I just can't help but pity him, you know. He's clearly a miserable screw-up, but still family, even if he doesn't deserve it. I wonder if including him would be the right thing." She trailed off uncertainly. Recognizing my daughter's enduring compassion even for those who least warranted it, I patted her hand reassuringly. You needn't ever compromise your kind principles. If some small mercy for Julian eases your mind, I can tolerate his presence just this once. Harper exhaled in relief and squeezed my hand gratefully. You're the best, Mom. I knew you'd understand. The sentimental moment was sharply interrupted by my ringing cell phone. Glancing down, I was stunned to see Julian's name flash across the screen. Months had passed since his last desperate drunken voicemail pleading for money. Face grim, I silenced the call. Speak of the devil, I remarked dryly. Harper shook her head. He never stops trying to worm his way back in. But don't worry, Mom. After the wedding, you'll never have to deal with his garbage again. I smiled gently at my daughter's protective tone. She was right. The time had long passed for me to entertain Julian's self-pitying overtures. I now had all I ever needed right here in my tranquil life, surrounded by those whose souls nurtured mine. No redirects from a toxic past could ever breach that blessing. I patted Harper's hand resolutely. Onwards and upwards, my dear. Now, tell me more about the lovely flower arrangements you envisioned. I smoothed the wrinkles on my silk evening gown and took a deep breath. Tonight's celebration dinner at the country club was supposed to be a joyous occasion, marking my husband Martin's retirement after decades at the helm of Reese Industries. Little did I know it would become the stage for one of the most shocking betrayals of my life. As we clinked champagne glasses with the board members and their spouses, Martin cleared his throat. I have an announcement to make, he declared, his eyes flickering toward a young woman at the other end of the table. My heart sank as I recognized Ava Carter, one of the junior marketing executives. The way Martin looked at her made my stomach churn. Lillian and I have decided to get divorced, Martin continued, his voice unwavering. I've fallen in love with someone else, and we plan to marry soon. A hush fell over the table as gasps and murmurs erupted. I felt all eyes boring into me, waiting for my reaction. Tears stunned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You coward, I spat at Martin, my voice trembling with fury. How dare you blindside me like this? I'm sorry, Lillian, he said, not sounding sorry at all. But I've made up my mind. Ava understands me in a way you never could. Ava shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks flushed. I shot her a withering glare, wondering how this naive girl could be so foolish. As the dinner descended into chaos, I excused myself, desperate for air. Out on the terrace, I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my breathing. Anger and humiliation washed over me in waves. Martin had been my whole world for over 30 years. We'd built Reese Industries together from the ground up, sacrificing countless nights and weekends. And this was how he repaid me, by casting me aside for someone half my age. I wiped away a stray tear, my jaw clenched with determination. If Martin thought I would go down without a fight, he was sorely mistaken. Game on, I thought grimly. The gloves were coming off. I tossed and turned that night, replaying the horror of Martin's betrayal over and over in my mind. How could the man I'd loved and supported for decades do this to me, to our family? As the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, I knew I couldn't wallow in misery any longer. If Martin wanted war, then war was what he'd get. I marched into the private bathroom and examined my reflection in the mirror. Though my eyes were puffy from crying, my resolve had never been stronger. I was Lillian Reese, and I would not be the victim here. The first order of business was hiring a bulldog of a divorce attorney. I had my secretary line up meetings with the city's most cutthroat legal eagles. Within a matter of hours, I was sitting across from Jennifer Holder, a ferocious litigator known for devouring wandering husbands. I want to bleed him dry, I stated bluntly as Jennifer flipped through my financial documents. She arched an immaculately groomed eyebrow. Even with your substantial assets, a nasty divorce could deplete your net worth considerably. Money is no object, I said through gritted teeth. That lying snake is going to pay for what he did to me and my family's legacy. A feral grin spread across Jennifer's razor-sharp features. Then let's make sure we take him for everything he's worth. Over the next few weeks, I followed Jennifer's guidance to the letter, marshaling every resource at my disposal. Quiet instructions were issued to Reese Industries' accounting department for a full forensic audit under the guise of routine due diligence. Every bank statement, every money transfer, I wanted them come through with a fine-tooth comb. Jennifer coached me on sowing seeds of doubt among the board members, suggesting personal concerns over Martin's ability to properly steer the company given his emotionally compromised state. A few whispered comments here, a furrowed brow there, and suddenly the company I'd helped build was questioning my husband's leadership. All the while, Martin sauntered around in a loved-up daze, oblivious to the powder keg I was carefully constructing around him. He thought I would simply walk away, that I would be content with whatever crumbs he deigned to toss my way in the divorce. The poor fool had no idea what kind of hell was coming. The forensic audit quickly bore fruit, revealing a tangled web of shady dealings all connected to Martin's desperation to impress his young mistress. Inflated expense reports, kickbacks from vendors, even outright embezzlement. He put Reese Industries' financial health at risk to fund his lavish courtship of Ava. I pored over the damning documents late into the night, my fury growing with each uncovered impropriety. This was the true depth of Martin's deceit. He was willing to sacrifice our life's work, the company we built from nothing, all for a fling with a girl young enough to be his daughter. The next morning, I hand-delivered the audit findings to the board, making sure to linger on the most egregious violations with pointed commentary. Clearly, Martin's judgment has been clouded by his personal indiscretions, I stated, careful to keep my tone measured despite the storm raging inside me. I shudder to think how much further this rot might have spread if left unchecked. One by one, I watched the concern etching itself onto the board members' faces. Even Martin's most ardent supporters couldn't deny the evidence of his mismanagement and potential criminality. Martin, for his part, seemed stunned by my revelations. The fool actually had the audacity to pull me aside and try to plead ignorance. "Lillian, you have to believe me. I never meant for things to go this far," he blubbered. "I've made some mistakes, sure, but it was all for love." I recoiled from his clammy grasp, disgust written plain across my face. "For love? You jeopardized everything we built together for some cheap fling. I don't even recognize you anymore." As is summoned, Ava appeared in the doorway, her overdone makeup unable to mask the fragility beneath. Martin's eyes immediately locked onto her, his entire stance changing as if their bond transcended the tawdry reality. "Don't worry, my dear," he cooed. "Once the old ball and chain is out of the way, nothing will keep us apart." The naked cruelty in his voice awakened an icy clarity in me. Forget taking him for everything he was worth. This man deserved to lose it all. I crossed the room and stood squarely between Martin and his prize. "Let me make one thing clear to both of you. I am not going anywhere. This company was my lifelong endeavor long before you came along, Ava, and I'll be damned if I let either of you destroy it with your recklessness." Ava opened her mouth, her panicked eyes flicking to Martin for support, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "As for you," I turned my withering gaze onto my soon-to-be ex-husband. "I did not survive decades of your insufferable ego just to be discarded in your twilight years. You want to play in the mud with this girl? Be my guest, but I guarantee the only thing awaiting you is regret." Turning on my heel, I left them gaping in my wake, already planning my next salvo. Let them have their fantasy for now. Their world was about to come crashing down. With the audit findings laying bare Martin's misdeeds, I knew I held all the leverage for ensuring a favorable divorce settlement. Still, I intended to twist the knife further before going in for the kill. I requested an emergency meeting with Martin, putting on my best act of contriteness when he arrived. "I've had some time to reflect on things," I began, wringing my hands for effect, "and I realize now how terribly I've behaved." Martin's eyes widened in surprise, and I fought back the urge to sneer at his gullibility. "Really? You're finally coming around." I was just so hurt and angry, I continued, letting my voice quaver with manufactured regret. "But I see now that I can't force you to love me. You found happiness with Ava, and it's not my place to stand in the way of true love." The smug satisfaction oozing from his expression was almost too much to bear. "Well, I'm glad you've come to your senses. This has been difficult enough without your vindictiveness making things worse." I reached across the table and grasped his hand, putting on my best pleading expression. "I only want what's best for you, Martin, which is why you have to end this affair immediately." His brow furrowed in confusion. "What? Why would I do that?" Leaning in, I lowered my voice conspiratorially. "Because I'm afraid Ava has been using you this whole time, taking advantage of your generous nature for her own gain." Martin opened his mouth to protest, But I barreled on with my carefully constructed narrative. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I've discovered evidence that she's been having other affairs. Multiple affairs, Martin. She's been bleeding you dry to fund her indiscretions behind your back. His face cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Anger, hurt, disbelief. No, Ava would never. We love each other. Putting on my most sorrowful expression, I gave his hand a pat. I'm so sorry, but it's true. The bank records, the money transfers, it's all there in black and white. She's been making a fool of you. Martin's shoulders slumped in defeat. For just an instant, I felt a pang of something, pity perhaps. It quickly passed as I recalled all the anguish he put me through. If it's any consolation, this newfound wisdom has made me realize how deeply I've misjudged you over the years. I lied through my teeth. Why, if I had a partner who showed half the care and steadfast dedication you've displayed, I would consider myself the luckiest woman alive. That seemed to bolster Martin's spirit somewhat as he mumbled a thank you. Men were so easy to manipulate once you mastered their fragile egos. As he lumbered out, I allowed myself a satisfied smile. Between the gaping financial void awaiting him and the carefully planted seeds of doubt about his precious Ava's fidelity, Martin's world was crumbling all around him. Just a few more shoves, and the whole pathetic facade would come crashing down in delicious ruin. With Martin reeling from my revelations about Ava's supposed infidelity, it was time to go for the kill shot. I convened an emergency board meeting, putting on my most solemn expression as the members filed in. I'm afraid I have some deeply troubling news regarding Martin's conduct as CEO. I began once everyone was seated. It pains me to have to do this, but the evidence leaves me no choice. I nodded to my assistant, who distributed the damning audit findings, letting the weight of the financials speak for themselves. Audible gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as they digested the extent of the embezzlement and misappropriation. As you can see, Martin has been systematically looting the company's coffers, all to fund an utterly unacceptable personal relationship, I declared, letting the accusation hang heavy in the air. His judgment has been hopelessly compromised to a degree that constitutes gross dereliction of duty. Walter Grimes, one of the senior board members known for his unshakable ethics, set down the report with a look of profound disappointment. I had my suspicions, given the rumors, but I never imagined the depths of Martin's betrayal. This is a gut punch. Believe me, Walter, I understand your pain all too well, I replied, putting on my most mournful expression. Which is why, as difficult as it is, I feel we have no choice but to relieve Martin of his duties, effective immediately. A chorus of solemn nods rippled through the room. Even those typically loyal to Martin seemed unable to overlook his staggering lapses. Gritting my teeth, I forced out my next words. It truly breaks my heart to say this, but Martin's personal indiscretions appear to have sent him into an emotional tailspin, calling into question his fitness to lead this company. For the good of Reese Industries and our employees, I recommend an indefinite leave of absence on medical grounds while he seeks treatment. The cowed reactions told me they had taken the bait by portraying Martin's ouster as a compassionate intervention rather than a straight termination. I had given them all plausible deniability to avoid feeling complicit in his downfall. As the meeting adjourned with the board's full endorsement, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Everything was falling into place perfectly. The forensics, the sowing of doubts, and now this coup de grace. A part of me felt a flicker of sadness at how far my beloved husband had fallen. But he had chosen to throw away the life we built together through his arrogance and weakness. I merely ensured he suffered the full consequences. My reverie was interrupted by the ping of a new email from Jennifer, my attorney. Pulling up the message, I scanned her concise update and felt a rush of vicious satisfaction. Transfer of assets proceeding as planned. The financial guillotine is primed. Just say the word. I typed a simple reply. Do it. Let the delicious ruination begin. The dominoes began falling into place with ruthless precision. Within days of being forced into a leave of absence, Martin found himself being systematically frozen out of Reese Industries operations. Emails went unanswered, meetings rescheduled, until he was essentially a ghost presence at the company he had once lorded over. I could only imagine the sinking feeling in the pit of his gut as the power he had taken for granted for decades slipped through his fingers. Still, I knew the worst was yet to come for the arrogant fool. Ms. Reese, you have a visitor. My assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. Ava Carter is asking to see you. A cruel smile tugged at my lips as I buzzed her in. The girl's arrival was right on schedule. Ava entered, looking every bit the rabbit caught in the headlights. Though she tried valiantly to maintain her polished composure, I could see the cracks spider webbing beneath the surface. "What can I do for you, dear?" I asked in my most saccharine tone as she took a seat. "I trust this isn't about your extracurricular activities with Martin. I would simply hate for word of that unpleasantness to spread further." Her eyes went wide with panic. What are you talking about?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing." I waved a perfectly manicured hand in feigned nonchalance. "Just that it would be an awful shame if those private investigator reports detailing your numerous other affairs ended up going public. Can you imagine the scandal?" Ava paled, and I fought back the urge to cackle at her obvious distress. The phony dossier I had concocted was truly a work of art. "But that's not true," she sputtered. "Martin and I, we love each other. It's just us." "If you say so, dear," I replied coolly. Though if I were you, I might be more concerned with his mounting legal troubles and the likelihood of financial ruin. That caught her attention as I'd intended. Leaning forward, I laid it all out for her in brutal clarity. The fraud charges looming over Martin, the asset freezes, the inevitable collapse of his net worth once the divorce was finalized. "Do you honestly think a man facing prison time and bankruptcy will have any qualms about leaving you high and dry?" I asked with mock sympathy. "Or that you'll still hold any appeal to him once the thrill of your tawdry affair fades?" Ava's porcelain features crumpled as the truth sank in. She was nothing more than a disposable plaything to Martin, shiny arm candy to be cast aside the moment she ceased to be convenient. "You're lying," she whispered. But it was clear she didn't believe her own words. Smiling thinly, I delivered the killing blow. "If I were you, I'd get out while you still can. Cut your losses and find yourself a fresh mark to leech off of. Plenty of rich, desperate fools out there to exploit." A single tear rolled down Ava's cheek as she stared at me in wordless stupor. I gave her a few moments to absorb the reality crashing down around her before delivering the final twist of the knife. "Oh, and one more thing before you go running back to that pathetic creature you've been betting," I added with sugary venom. "I'd strongly advise emptying out any of Martin's personal accounts or assets you have access to. You'll need whatever you can get to restart your entrepreneurial activities." For just an instant, Ava's mask slipped, and I saw the ruthless mercenary parasite lurking underneath. That was all the confirmation I needed that my carefully planted mole had succeeded in guiding her toward the path of maximum damage. Nodding to herself, Ava stood and wiped away the crocodile tears before squaring her shoulders in false bravado. "You're going to regret this," she spat out in a tremulous voice utterly devoid of conviction. I simply laughed as she turned on her heel and stormed out. The delusional girl had no idea how correct she was, but not for the reasons she thought. Once this was all over, the only regret I would feel was not destroying them even sooner. The endgame was finally upon us. Within weeks of Ava's hasty exit, the other shoe dropped with a reverberating thud that shook Martin to his core. I took no small pleasure in being present as the investigator from our corporate security team laid out the damning evidence: bank statements, wire transfers, photos, an entire dossier documenting how Ava had systematically looted over 7 figures from Martin's personal accounts and investment portfolios. She couldn't have," Martin stammered, his face becoming an ashen mask of disbelief. "We were going to start a life together." The investigator simply shrugged, his expression one of practiced neutrality. "I'm afraid the money trail doesn't lie, Mr. Reese. This appears to have been a long-running scheme to bleed you dry." Martin's eyes found mine, pleading for a lifeline amidst the crashing waves of betrayal. "Lillian, you have to believe me. I never thought she was capable of something like this." I crossed my arms, regarding him with a look of utter disdain. "Really, Martin, because it seems to me that poor judgment and self-delusion have become something of a pattern for you lately." His shoulders sagged in defeat as the weight of his situation clearly crushed down upon him. It would have been almost pitiable if he weren't such a despicable creature. "But I don't understand. Why? Why would she do this to me after everything I sacrificed?" He choked out. This time I allowed myself a feral smile. "Isn't it obvious? You were nothing more than a means to an end. A vain, gullible fool ripe for the fleecing by someone younger and prettier who knew just which strings to pull." Martin opened his mouth, no doubt to try and defend his precious Ava's honor, but I silenced him with a raised hand. Save your breath and what little dignity you have left. This is just the opening act. My smile twisted into something darker. The avalanche was coming, and he was going to lose everything. Over the next several days, the full scope of Martin's ruination began revealing itself. The financial penalties and legal fees started piling up, draining his liquid assets. Forensic auditors identified even more dubious transactions and potential tax avoidance schemes, bringing down the wrath of the IRS. Meanwhile, the revelations of corporate malfeasance I had carefully stoked stripped Martin of every remaining board seat and title position. He went from captaining a billion-dollar empire to a shunned pariah in the span of a month, his legacy crumbling into dust. The killing blow, however, came from an unexpected direction. The gossip rags and society pages that had once fawned over his storybook marriage to me were now tearing him apart. With the collapse of his non-disclosure agreement as part of the divorce proceedings, I carefully fed tantalizing morsels about his affair and accompanying spending benders to key media contacts. Soon tales of poor, used Martin and his gold-digging mistress were splashed across the glossies in salacious detail. A scandal of such delicious karmic proportions was simply too irresistible to avoid, no matter how much old money changed hands to smother it initially. In one final insult, Martin's beloved country club membership was terminated under a cloud of humiliation, the old guard closing ranks around him like a vice. He had become a cautionary tale, something to be shunned and whispered about over chilled Martinez. When he inevitably crawled back to me, begging for clemency and a chance to restore some fragment of his former life, I denied him with icy finality. "This is the bed you made for yourself, Martin," I said, unmoved by his pleas. "I suggest you learn to sleep in it." As he slumped away, broken and discarded, I felt an unfamiliar sensation blossom within me. Not quite happiness, but perhaps a sense of resolution. This chapter of betrayal and trauma was finally closed, allowing me to turn my focus to what lay ahead. The machinations had been brutally unpleasant but a necessary crucible to ensure my complete autonomy moving forward. Never again would I allow anyone or anything to compromise the destiny I had fought so hard for. I was Lillian Reese, newly anointed captain of my own fate, and the world had better be ready for my brand of merciless stewardship. As the ashes settled from the scorched battlefield that was my divorce, I wasted no time in firmly establishing my leadership over Reese Industries. The board meetings that had once been merely a formality were now the arenas where I flexed my hard-won power. Profitability is down over 12% compared to last quarter's projections. I stated in a tone that brooked no argument as I stared down the assembled executives. I want to know why, and I want solutions on my desk within 48 hours. There was a momentary silence as the senior leadership team avoided eye contact, each silently willing one of the others to step into the firing line first. Finally, Stephen, the CFO who had been Martin's loyal foot soldier for years, cleared his throat. The shortfalls can likely be attributed to the recent transition and its attending disruptions, he began, choosing his words carefully, not to mention the lingering PR headaches from, My eyes narrowed dangerously. "You mean the scandal my dearly departed husband created through his reprehensible behavior, the one that jeopardized this entire company's future through his recklessness?" Stephen visibly shrank back, face flushing. "Well, I didn't mean to imply." "Save it," I cut him off with a withering glare. "I don't want to hear any more excuses about factors beyond our control. We make our own destiny here, and anyone unable to adapt to my leadership would be wise to explore other opportunities." The room had gone deathly quiet, the temperature seeming to drop several degrees as the gathered executives finally recognized the new power dynamics at play. This was no longer the Reese Industries of old, where decisions were debated ad nauseam behind closed doors. There would be no more nods to consensus or democratic hand-wringing. My edicts would be final. Mrs. Reese, Maria, the head of operations, ventured after clearing her throat. "If I may be so bold, your decisive vision is a marked change from how we've traditionally operated. I think I speak for everyone when I say an adjustment period will be required before we can realign strategy." A few cautious nods rippled through the table, though most seemed to sense the undercurrent of defiance in Maria's words. My jaw clenched hard enough to crack walnuts. Slowly rising to my feet, I fixed Maria with a look that could blister paint. "Let me make one thing crystal clear for you and your cohorts," I said, my voice like razors scraping steel. "I did not survive decades of being gaslit and undermined by that spineless bastard I called a husband only to face further diminishment from his lackey." Maria shrank back in her seat, all bravado evaporating as I stalked around the table toward her. I could sense the others watching with a mixture of disbelief and morbid fascination. None dared intervene as the new order asserted itself. "This company's oligarchic days are over," I stated, leaning in until Maria was forced to maintain eye contact. "Either acclimate to my leadership and start pulling your weight, or I'll find those better suited to my vision. Am I making myself clear?" She nodded almost imperceptibly, seeming to have momentarily forgotten how to form words. Straightening up, I turned my gaze to encompass the entire cowed assemblage. I did not fight my way through the depths of hell itself just to be undermined again. Reese Industries answers to me now and me alone. My lip curled slightly. "And if that reality is too difficult for any of you to accept, I'd be more than happy to expedite your transition into unemployment." The silence that followed spoke volumes. The machine had a new master, and woe betide anyone foolish enough to forget that. As the meeting disbanded, I allowed myself a tight, predatory smile. This was merely an opening gambit, the first assertion of the ruthlessness that would be required to remake this company in my own image. Pity Martin hadn't possessed even a fraction of my strength and resolved those final years he frittered away in pursuit of his youthful indulgences. Perhaps then this bloody transition could have been avoided. But in the end, his failures had become my greatest advantage, the forge where my own ferocious independence was smelted, where I emerged hardened, immutable, and finally in complete control of my destiny. I was Lillian Reese, and from this day forward, my name would be synonymous with strength, perseverance, and remorseless ambition. All that remained was for the rest of the world to take heed.